everybody. Thank you everybody for joining for today's webinar. This is the last webinar for our Black Community Development webinar series. The topic for today is environmental racism justice in Black communities, building sustainable futures. And this webinar really explores the disproportionate impact of environmental hazards on Black communities, looking at the systemic policies that perpetuate these inequities. And participants will learn about the advocacy strategies, community-led solutions, the importance of environmental justice in achieving sustainable development. And so just to go over a few things about the webinar, we are recording the webinar. We'll post it on our YouTube channel soon. Please keep your microphone muted unless you're speaking. If you are invited to speak, please remember to unmute yourself and mute again once you're finished. If you have any questions, you can use the chat function for comments or questions. If you're speaking or asking a question, please try to keep it brief to respect everyone's time and to allow everyone to get their question across. Please allow the presenter to manage the time and to follow the agenda, especially during the Q&A session. We have the last 20 to 30 minutes specifically for Q&A, but we will take questions throughout the conversation as well. Please don't record or share any part of this webinar. We will be posting it on our YouTube channel, as I mentioned before. And then just to give a brief update, also we have our 2025 National Conference on Black Cooperative Agenda coming up. It's in Atlanta, Georgia, from June 13th to the 15th. So we're really excited about that as well. It's in Morehouse College in Atlanta, Georgia. So we're really excited to see everyone there. And with that, I'll go ahead and introduce our moderator for today, Lynn. Lynn Pinder is a Baltimore-based educator, author, and advocate with over 30 years of dedication to environmental justice and adult literacy. Inspired by national environmental advocates, she began her career as a national organizer for Physicians for Social Responsibility, later co-founding Youth Warriors, an environmental justice program for Baltimore youth. She has led adult literacy initiatives and now serves as director of Baltimore Green Jobs Academy, creating green career training opportunities for adults. A founding member of Baltimore Green Justice Workers Cooperative, she continues to drive innovative solutions for a more sustainable and just Baltimore. We then have our first panelist, Jennifer Gould, joined the Neighborhood Design Center, Maryland's nonprofit community design center, in 2012, after more than a decade of work in historic preservation, real estate development, and planning. At NDC, she directs all aspects of the center's operations, including staff, programs, outreach, and fundraising. She's also a passionate advocate for equitable, sustainable investment in the built environment. A Baltimore resident since 1993, she has been involved in many of the city's largest historic building rehabilitations, including the American Can Company's Brewers Hill, Clipper Mall, Silo Point, and Tide Point. She holds a BS in Interior Design from Indiana University and an MS in Historic Preservation from Columbia University. We then have Dina Pierrot, is a serial entrepreneur, diversity strategist, and international speaker, best known as the founder and CEO of iUrban Teen, an award winning STEM serve as administrative advisor for equity with the city of Seattle. She has also held a gubernatorial appointment to Washington's Commission for African American Affairs. We have Brianna Parker. She's a senior director of the Accelerator at Elevate, where she advances equitable solutions for clean and affordable energy and water. She leads strategic partnerships, capacity building initiatives, and technical assistance for community organizations addressing environmental inequities. A part-time social work professor at Wayne State University, she specializes in community development and equity. A skilled facilitator and systems thinker, Brianna fosters collaboration through workshops in environmental justice and organizational development. A licensed attorney with degrees in law and social work, she brings a multidisciplinary approach to advocacy, nonprofit leadership, and policy championing sustainability and equity-driven solutions. I want to thank our speakers and our moderator today for being a part of this conversation. We're really looking forward to this conversation, a really important topic as well. And with that, I'll go ahead and hand over the conversation to our wonderful moderator for tonight, Lynn.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that introduction, and welcome everyone. We're really excited about this moment and this opportunity, and we're just going to jump right in. And we've had the introductions. I know we've done the introductions of our panelists. Want to invite those of you who are participating to feel free to introduce yourself in the chat, put your name, your organizational affiliation, and your locale. Feel free also throughout the conversation to share resource links for communities to use in our fight against environmental racism and in our effort to attain justice. And feel free to put some examples of things that you're doing in your community. We want this to be interactive. So we're going to just jump right in, and we're going to begin by really grounding ourselves. Our first question: how do you define environmental racism, and how have you seen it show up in Black communities historically and today? And I'll help you all out. We'll start off with Jennifer, and then after Jennifer gets finished speaking, whoever wants to chime in, feel free to do that.
Great, thank you, Lynn. Your presence is really grounding me automatically. You have such a, every time I'm around you, I'm just like, oh, Lynn's energy. So I would define environmental racism as the disproportionate impact of negative environmental impacts upon Black and Brown communities globally, really. That most of the resource extraction, as well as dumping and in resiliency impacts, sustainability impacts, are being disproportionately borne by people, the places where people, Black and Brown people live. And that's really the crux of what I tend to think of when I think of environmental racism. I'm going to weave my story around one community in Baltimore tonight. When I was maybe a year or two after I started at Neighborhood Design Center, we're Maryland's community design center. We do pro bono and low-cost design and planning services for Maryland's low and moderate income neighborhoods. So most of the neighborhoods that we end up working with bear some impact of environmental racism. And so that's something we always look to identify during the planning process, as well as looking for ways that the built environment is creating that impact, and how we could come up with an equitable way to overcome those impacts. As I was getting started as a director, I heard about some organizing that was happening in South Baltimore in the Curtis Bay community, which is one of the most environmentally impacted zip codes in the whole country, always like top 3. And they were doing this really a group called United Workers was doing this really creative work, leading parades, doing public art, to raise awareness in regards to the incinerator that's located right adjacent to the community, as well as the coal yards that are cheek and jowl with the neighborhood houses. And so I was very inspired by the way they were leading this organizing. So I just started going and joining in on the activities so I could learn more and learn about organizing, period. When I started at NDC, we were founded in 1968. I dug through our archives back to some of the first projects that we did, and I had a clear memory that some of the very first projects that NDC worked on were down in Curtis Bay, and there were very moving photographs of people living in houses that at that point still didn't have running water or indoor plumbing, and the NDCers that were helping tackled the very same issues, 50 years prior. So it just really brought it home to me how little movement there had been on these topics, and how the very same toxic conditions remained firmly in place in the day in which I was taking the helm at NDC. And so it really has inspired me to think as much as I can about this topic, as it seems, because it is systematic, one of the most challenging to overcome.
And I kind of want to piggyback on what Jennifer was saying, but for me, my definition of environmental racism is when Black communities and other communities of color and low-income communities are exposed to environmental hazards and pollution due to systemic discrimination. Kind of lumps it all up. But for me, my experience and my background, what I've seen was I was working with the city of Portland in environmental services. And that was my first exposure into the environmental landscape. That was back in the early 90s, 1990s. And what I quickly noticed was, we had all of these meetings and folks coming in talking about environmental issues in different areas, and they were all white. I didn't see anyone that looked like me in any of these meetings. And some of the topics and issue that they were framing and focusing on were issues that were in more of the affluent neighborhoods. It wasn't in the communities of color, and particularly the Black community that I knew of, nor was there very much outreach into those communities and those spaces to make them aware of brownfield issues, and those type of issues, dumping toxic waste issues. And so I would go out and meet with different groups like the Urban League and try to have info sessions to make the community aware of what the city was doing in that environmental space and trying to invite them into the conversation. Was it impactful? Yes and no. What I find more impactful now is working with the youth in my program that are actually learning this stuff and getting more engaged in it. But yeah, so that's my kind of history, and I don't want to jump ahead of the questions that I know you're going to ask.
I think you're muted, Lynn.
Thank you. Brianna, you want to chime in?
Yeah, when I think of environmental racism, similar to everyone else, I think about my community that I grew up in Detroit, and I think about the lack of access to clean air and water. I have conversations with people all the time, and I ask them this simple question: when you were in school, did they have to evacuate your school because you got exposed to asbestos, lead, and you can't breathe? Well, that happened to me. And you know what? I find that it happens to a lot of people in frontline communities. And that is environmental racism to me.
But the thing that I find challenging, Brianna, when you're saying that, I think that a lot of communities, a lot of the officials would not tell our Title I schools or our schools that were focusing on Black and brown youth about those environmental issues until someone brought it up. If no one brought it up, I think they would have still let it linger on and let our kids breathe in those toxic fumes, be in lead-filled paint, all of those kind of things. So I think, unfortunately, I feel that it still continues to this day.
Indeed.
If I could just add and say that's really important, because I didn't understand until I was in my 20s that I was like, that was environmental racism, that was something that shouldn't have happened. I mean, it's real. It's no resources for that. People don't get, those conversations aren't happening in the way that they should happen. So thank you for lifting.
Indeed, indeed. And, when we talk about environmental racism, it's so important that we are able to define what it means to us and for us and how it applies to our communities. And so the teacher in me is saying, hey, there's lots of books out, but we can't even speak of a book without talking about the work of Dr. Robert Bullard, who many people call the father of the EJ movement. And so I've put in the chat, and I hope that everyone can see this. And if not, if you all can help me out to make sure that our participants will see this in the larger chat group. But we have Dumping in Dixie, which was written probably, I'm thinking maybe in like the 1980s. Well, no, Dumping in Dixie was in 2000. And this particular book provides the major economic, social, and psychological impacts associated with the siting of noxious facilities and their significance in mobilizing the African-American community. It explores the barriers to environmental and social justice experienced by African-Americans. And then the second link that I put in the book, and I believe that there were earlier editions of that first edition. I think the first edition was probably in the 1980s, but this next book is called Confronting Environmental Racism, and that's also by Dr. Robert Bullard, and it's the tagline is Voices from the Grassroots. And so those are two great books for you all to dig into as you are thinking about environmental racism. What does it mean? How does it apply to my community? And so I want to make sure that our participating audience really get a chance to kind of dig in and dive into that. So thank you, everybody, for helping us frame the question about environmental racism. Let's talk a little bit about our lived experience and community impact. When I think about my lived experience, I think about growing up here in Baltimore and how lead poisoning was such a major issue and still is a major issue. And I'm nearing 50. Well, I have to say I'm fibbing a little bit. I'm a half past 50 almost. And lead poisoning is still an issue. And so I wonder if some of you might take the opportunity to share a specific example of environmental injustice in a Black community that you've worked in or studied, and talk a little bit about the consequences.
I want to start off with that, if you don't mind, for you guys, because what I thought about was when I was saying back in the 1990s, when I was working in environmental sciences and went into the Black community, at that time, it was the Albina, called the Albina neighborhood, and where a lot of injustices were happening. And I actually printed off some information. I'm just going to read it lightly. It says the historical treatment and subsequent consequences of the Albina neighborhood, North and Northeast Portland, the environmental injustice, redlining, and segregation for decades through discriminatory practices like redlining and restrictive covenants. Black residents in Portland were largely confined to the Albina area. This created a concentrated Black population in a specific geographic zone. Due to, in that area, the construction of the interstate I-5, where you had exhaust, you had major air quality issues associated that were in that community, high percentages of asthma. Years later and decades later, until this day, high incidence of asthma in Black youth. The placement of industrial facilities that were built there, the Columbia River Slough bordering Albina, became a dumping ground for industrial waste, and the lack of green space, tree canopies, which caused, because of all the concrete, no trees. So that area also had a higher concentration of heat, a heat index. They've changed it over the years because now through gentrification, we don't have a Black community in North and Northeast Portland anymore. So of course, all of that's been taken care of. But what I remember when I kept going out into the neighborhoods, it was in that Albina area, trying to make them aware, of the issues, dealing because of where they were redlined and segmented to.
Thank you for sharing that. Who would like to chime in?
You want to go, Brianna?
Yeah, I can go. Well, I can say that I grew up on the same block that my family's from Alabama, and I grew up on the same block that my grandmother moved to when she was when she moved to Detroit in the 1940s. And that block is it's a very industrial block. Like there's factories all over. I grew up in, like I said, I grew up in the same neighborhood. There's nobody still alive in that neighborhood except for me and my sister and my brother, because they all died of cancer at really high rates. And I can say that, the work that I do today, working in water, working in energy, and just understanding like the experience of people having to decide whether you spend money on your cancer medication or you get food and all the other things that you need to survive, is a consistent injustice in the community. It hasn't changed. It's still something that people are working on today. People are still living in communities that are industrial today. So the work is continuous. That's all.
Indeed, indeed. Jennifer, what have you said?
Sure, sure. So I grew up in a white farming community in the Midwest, totally different set of hazards, but I moved to Maryland in 1993 to Baltimore City. I was very motivated to move to a city and to join in bringing my skills and efforts to really seeing change in a place where change is deeply needed. And so as I got involved in Curtis Bay and got to know the leaders there, I'm just going to share a quick image of a few things so that people can get a bit of a picture. The first project that we did in Curtis Bay, this is a picture, there is a green space right by the water, and all along this edge are giant coal fields where the ships come in. It's a waterfront community with 17 different toxic industries along the edge of this community, and then the incinerator just beyond. And they had just experienced a devastating fire in this whole row of houses. And I think this is the moment where the leaders of United Workers, who are shown in the forefront here, really realized that not only did they need to organize to change the inputs coming from industry into their community, but that the housing situation was another hazard, for another layer of hazard for the people that they were working with and organizing with. And in that year, Neighborhood Design Center was hosting a conference for the Association for Community Design, which is really a subset of design field that works on community-led design processes. So whenever we decide to partner, when a community asks us to partner with them to come up with solutions for challenges in their built environment, we spend just an enormous time just listening, like what's going on, what are the potential ideas, what are the potential solutions. So United Workers really decided to tackle this particular row of houses on Hazel Street first. And so we did like a first little mini design endeavor with the conference participants, coming to meet all the residents, look at the houses, and start to think about a way to rehab these into healthy homes, homeownership homes. And then all the local kids came and start to think about, okay, if this were a safe park to play in, kids didn't really play in that too much because it was often just like a cloud of coal dust. But imagine a future where we could play here. What would you want in the park? And that was just kind of our first step, with this community and getting very deeply involved in what's now like a 10-year relationship toward building healthy homes in this space. And I always forget
Sharing.
how to do a stop share. There it is.
Thank you for sharing that. That was very powerful. Indeed, indeed. And it makes me think too about, you know, the hodgepodge of issues here in Baltimore. I can remember, you know, as I mentioned earlier, in my younger days, my focus was specifically around lead poisoning and, you know, raising awareness and fighting a fight of making sure that institutions like Kennedy Krieger and Johns Hopkins, when they did their research, that they did it in a way that was respectful to the communities that they were researching, and also would not put families in harm's way. And there was a particular study that was done in the early 1990s and a lot of organizing here in Baltimore in the early 2000, you know, to really hold Kennedy Krieger and Johns Hopkins accountable in terms of how they go about studying lead poisoning in families and making sure that there was informed consent and making sure that people weren't allowed to stay in properties that researchers knew was lead infested, but the people who lived there didn't know, but yet they were part of a study that was studying the impacts, you know, and so really making sure that even in, you know, modern times, that researchers are really taking the best interests of our communities at hand. And so want to give everybody an opportunity to kind of chime in if there's any other comments you want to share about that particular point.
Well, I'll just add, I think that nothing about the point, but I think that I just wanted to like amen what you're saying. I think that having communities tell their own story is so powerful. And like I said, but for me working in this industry, I never could, I don't think I would have been able to like create a story around like my life and environmental injustice. So I just want to lift that up.
Yeah, yeah.
And Brianna, me too. If I didn't get that job at the city working in environmental sciences or services, I wouldn't have thought about it. And that makes me realize that so many of our community members don't think about it unless someone shares it with them. You know, that's why the storytelling and being that griot, you know, is going to be so information, knowledge is power. You know, when you give our community that knowledge, it empowers them to make an impact and make a difference.
Indeed, it does. And, you know, this is, I believe it's like the 34th anniversary of the first National People of Color Environmental Leadership Summit that happened in the early 1990s. And now more than ever, you know, we need those principles, those 17 principles of environmental justice that came out of that meeting. Now more than ever, we need to be able to have opportunities like this where we're sharing our stories and we are able to take resources to our communities so that we can make sure that people have the voice and people have the platform, right, to be able to share their voice. And so while we're kind of taking all of that into consideration, that takes us, you know, right into the power of organizing, the power of policy, and the power of advocacy. And so I hope that each of you could just kind of think about what have been some of the effective grassroots or policy level responses to environmental racism that you've seen work in Black communities. I know for me, I think I already mentioned that 1991 People of Color Environmental Summit. That for me, and I'm going to put a YouTube link in the chat And again, I hope that that's something that can be shared with the larger audience. That's a video of some of the footage from 1991. And as I grew older, as I, continued to work in the movement and began to meet some of the people that I saw in the videos and had the opportunity to work with them, it really helped me have a better understanding of how to apply this work to what I was living in Baltimore.
Lynn, I'm going to say your organization is a model organization for making an impact, a grassroots impact in the whole environmental justice space. So kudos to you. I just think about, in the communities that I worked in, I now live in Dallas, Texas area, but in the Pacific Northwest, some of the grassroots organizations there that have been trying to make an impact, but still barriers of entry. I mean, there's still, with the policies in place and not getting support or funding they need to really be impactful, but I do love seeing some of the larger organizations like the Urban League, the NAACP, LULACs, getting more involved in the whole environmental issue. And I've seen that impact over the past, I'm going to say 5 to 6 years. So it's kind of a newer space for them, but they're more known than some of the smaller grassroots organizations. So I'm glad to see some of those legacy organizations really getting involved.
Indeed, indeed.
I've been able to see organizing, policy action, with and just like suing, right? Like lawsuits. That's important. I've seen that in Detroit with the water affordability and just the clean water movement. I had an opportunity a couple of years ago to work on a film that just showed like it was really the connection between Black communities in Philadelphia and Detroit, rural communities in Martin County, Kentucky, Iowa, just the connection, because I also think that in policy, like Black people make up a certain amount of the population. Therefore, allies are definitely needed to move to policy change. And I've also heard it's a concept of like when you do policy or you do these organizing efforts, you should do it with Black people in mind because of poverty rates and all of those things. And so I would say that film just showed the evolution of the water work and how it's not just affecting Black people, but it's definitely affecting them in a very harsh and aggressive way, from losing your house because of a water bill, getting that taxed on your taxes. So I just want to like lift up the arts again, because storytelling again is so powerful, and allyship is super powerful. You need friends.
Oh yeah. You know what? I'm going to second, third, and fourth that, because you can't do this alone. You need multiple folks at the table. I know for me, with a lot of the movements that I created, they were successful because I had those champions, those partners in crime that may not have looked like me, at the table. One dear friend, Clark Henry, that was working at the city with me, now he's in North Carolina, how he would get out there in the streets and help, bang the drum about getting our communities, our Black and brown communities, more interested, more engaged, in environmental justice. So again, you have to have those allies to help with moving anything forward.
Indeed.
Yeah. Turning back to the work that United Workers did to organize, they were able to get through, they really worked to build allies even within institutions like Hopkins and Towson, with activist professors to publish heavy research on the conditions, like the data side of things. But then they would bring forward very powerful events and stories that would get a lot of press, like national and international press. And they did get a commitment from the city and state to close the incinerator eventually. It should be happening much sooner than it is, but they did get a clear commitment on that. And the other thing that they were able to do on the housing side was to do an action through the voting mechanism to get it voted in to create an affordable housing trust fund that is sets aside a little bit of money from every transfer tax, every transfer transaction for property, puts some money aside into this affordable housing trust fund, and with a special pot within that trust fund for community land trusts. And they've worked really hard to build a whole community land trust sector in Baltimore to increase the opportunities for community-owned property rather than maybe the more top-down traditional model where affordable housing is often rental housing and is actually just really financially benefiting the dominant culture again. So I think that they've been really effective at using creativity and storytelling, but also some hard-nosed publicity to get commitments from people, whether that's commitments to change in the environmental condition sources, as well as commitments for funding streams.
Indeed, and indeed, and thank you all for sharing that. And again, I have to think back to. I'm trying to just think back to specifically in Baltimore around that lead issue, and I put a link to the journal article that I did a while back, and it was actually called Commentary on the Kennedy Krieger Institute Lead Paint Repair and Maintenance Study. And what it did was it gave a critical analysis of the ethical considerations surrounding a particular study that Kennedy Krieger and Johns Hopkins did. And despite the institution's reputation for humanitarian achievements, the study faced backlash for its non-therapeutic research methods, particularly the implications for vulnerable populations of children and pregnant women in frontline communities in lead-poisoned housing. And the commentary emphasized the necessity for researchers to uphold integrity and sensitivity to the communities they study while highlighting the ongoing lead poisoning crisis in Baltimore. And, from that work, that wasn't just me alone. At the time, I was working with a group called the People's Plan, and it was Dr. Tyrone Powers and Dr. Leslie Blyther and a sister who's no longer here, Cynthia Smith and Sheena Smith and tons of other community activists that was raising the alarm that this is going on. And even though it's Hopkins, and we respect and appreciate their study and research, they're still putting our communities at risk. And so we had to go to the press, we had to have meetings with them. And I would like to think that because of that, they have been more intentional about how they approach community. And I think it's so important that we're able to be on point, to be on point and to be able to rally our resources, because if we don't fight for us, no one will. You're muted. Did you? Yeah.
No, I just said amen. You got that right. And more so often too, we have to learn how do we support each other in this effort.
Yes.
That's one of the things that we don't do well, is play in the sandbox well together. We have to understand our legacy as people.
Well, you know what? I'm gonna push back on that, because I think many of us play in the sandbox well together. And I'm putting in some names of some people who have gone home to glory: Hazel Johnson out of Chicago, Connie Tucker out of Georgia, Damu Smith out of DC, Marcy Jackson out of UPAL, over the years, and folks that are still alive, Dr. Mildred McLean out of Savannah, Georgia. You know, I think I'm gonna push back on it a little bit because we have as a community, and even through that People of Color 1991 Summit, we as a community, we come together when we need to fight the fight, you know? And
Fight the
so
fight.
we come together when we need to fight the fight. And I think now more than ever, you're seeing the beauty of us coming together. I had the opportunity to be part of some of the Black co-opinomics classes that Ron does out of the Network for Developing Conscious Communities, and learning about the history of Black farmers and the Southern co-ops that have been going on for years, you know, and so we work together, you know, and it's unfortunate that
It's unfortunate that it's in
yeah,
silos though, because I
yeah.
don't know how true that is in the Pacific Northwest. So I can just kind of tell from that experience. But no, I think that for this, in this work, and I'd love to hear about what's happening and it's been happening. I know that we can work together, but in certain pockets of areas, we have to understand that we are more powerful in numbers, right? We can make those policy changes, you know, in numbers. You know, if we have a strategic plan in place, getting that support each other. One person doesn't have to lead it all. We can lead it collectively moving forward. So in certain communities, I'm hoping that that works a little bit better. It sounds like it works best on the East Coast, but on some of these other cities, I feel like that can even work here in Texas. I feel a large community of support here in Texas area, believe it or not, red as this state is, you know, so.
Yeah. I think it's like you said, getting connected, because I think there are folks out there and they're working, and we may think it's a silo, but there's community, what we call community strong, you know, in their community. And so we have to do the research, and we have to dig deep and find out where they are. And I think that's what is so beautiful about the work that Brianna does with the organization that she works with, where they are providing resources in terms of grant dollars, in terms of technical assistance, to be able to help build the capacity of the organizations that need it most. Brianna, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yes. So I work for I work on a specific project. It's an accelerator project that help organizations, frontline organizations, get access to federal funding. We all know where federal funding is. We know that was a time. That time is like gone. But thank you, Lynn, because we're in the process of reorganizing ourselves and trying to understand how to bring people together during this time, so that when the next round of funding comes around or whatever else happens, that we're together. So we're organizing 3 convenings, one in the East Coast in Baltimore in October, one in the Midwest in Chicago, also at the beginning of October, and one on the West Coast, which I live in Texas, so Texas is included in the West Coast, in Oakland, California at the end of September. So that work it's a lot of outreach, it's ongoing, bringing people together is important, I think, during this time.
Indeed. And so I put a website link to the Bullard Center, which is now at Texas Southern University. And they actually have an event coming up in June that you might want to take a look at. And this is going to be a gathering of environmental justice leaders, not just in the state of Texas, but from around the country. And so I'm not sure how far you are from Texas Southern University, but that would be a great connect for you.
That, you're right. That would be. I thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
I see a question from Ardelia.
Maybe let me unmute her and then let me mute them. Are you? I think I unmuted you, Ardelia, if you're able to.
Maybe she has her hand raised on.
Oh, you know what? I think when you were posting things, Lynn, it's going to the host and the panelists. it wasn't going to the broader audience.
Okay.
Yeah, let
Are
me.
you able to repost all of the things that I've posted?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, thanks so much, Emil.
But just for I don't know if you can see, but in the blue box in the chat when you're just about to send the text, it says two hosts and panelists, and there's like a drop down button. So if you go in everyone, I think if that's showing
It
to you,
doesn't give me the option for
That's
It
then I'll
doesn't.
reshare them. Yeah, I reshared.
Yeah.
I reshared the past ones, and I'll do that to the rest.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Mhm.
All right. So we've been kind of talking about from our experience. I'm not going to call us old fogies. Brianna might take offense to that, but
Jeremy's
but
definitely
some
not
of us are. We're getting
Oh.
a little up there. I was laughing with one of my friends. I said, "Guess what? I'm an elder now. I don't know how I feel about that."
Girl, if you're an elder, I'm 66. I'll be 67 in October. So
Yeah, we
I'm older
elders
than her.
now. I'm not too far from you. You know what they say about us. You know what they say.
The other night I referred to myself as a lady of a certain age. I'm like,
I'm a sage now. I'm a sage.
Indeed. And with that in mind, let's just kind of shift a little bit in terms of thinking about our young people, thinking about intergenerational work, thinking about how we can better educate and do outreach, specifically with the question of how are Black youth engaged in environmental justice work, and what do you think they need from us? Us baby boomers, I'm in Generation X, or the millennials. How are Black youth engaged in environmental justice work, and what do they need from the baby boomers, the Generation Xers, the millennials, in order to thrive? Who wants to
I
tackle
want
that?
to go first because I have a youth program, but there's someone that has their hand raised.
I think she was bringing forward she wasn't able to see our chat. So I think Emma's working on it for us.
Yeah, they are unmuted, Ardelia, if you want to write in the chat, or if you want to, maybe they're not here right now, but they do have
It may be inadvertent.
the,
I I I cannot see you all, but I cannot unmute show myself. But it's interesting what you all are talking about, and I am very concerned about the injustice that is in our community. Uh, we do have a group. I live in Baltimore, Maryland.
Oh,
We
good.
do have a group of ladies who has formed an organization which is called Women United to bring the children to the light. And one of the things that they are doing is we're going out to reach children in the community, giving them better opportunities so that they will not turn to the street. We are also working through the schools in the city to meet and talk with the children once a week. We explain to them they are where they are because the things that our ancestors went through in
Mhm.
order for to be where we are. We also talk to them about the struggle that Martin Luther King himself went through and the ups and downs that the Black race have gone through ever since the discovery of America and the
Yes.
problems that we have to come up with to have to deal with these problems because we know that there are injustices totally in the Black community.
Yes. And what part of Baltimore are you in, Miss Huntley?
Oh, she muted herself
If
One
again.
you
of
still talk, there you go. You went out for about a few seconds.
Okay, and one of the things we explain to the children in the Black community that law enforcement are looking at the Black children, the Latino children, and they're not considered, as far as they're concerned, they're not considered as human. So you treat them inhuman.
Mm,
And you have to be very careful because they don't mind shooting and killing you.
mhm,
And we know that we do have very crooked cops in the police department.
mhm.
We try to encourage them. We try to see that they get jobs and work with the low income families and all, to try to help them to understand that the streets are not the way. And if we can get that into them, that the streets is not the way, all you're doing is doing what the white man wants you to do what we as a race need to do. And I find one of the reason we have such a problem in
Mhm.
our race is because we have too much individualism. It's
Mm.
all about me, myself, and I. If I'm
Mm.
not the head of it, then I don't want to be a part of it. So I'm gonna do everything I can to distract you or disrupt your organization. So that's
Wow.
where I am right now.
Well, thank you so much for sharing. What part of Baltimore are you in?
I live in the Emerson Village area.
Okay, all
It's
right.
not-
We're not too far from you. Our satellite office is in Park Circle, and for a while we had a satellite office over there in Irvington with Mr. Hance and
With Mr.
NDCC,
Who?
Ron Hance, Network for Developing Conscious Communities.
Yeah,
He's
I know who
right
you're talking about.
Right,
Uh-huh.
he's right there on Frederick Avenue. So I
Yes.
would love to connect with you. Make
Mhm.
sure you put if it's okay with you, put
I
your
put it
uh,
I put it in chat because I am the president
absolutely.
of the Southwest District Police Community Relation Council.
Okay, indeed. We will
Okay.
definitely connect.
Well, we're talking about how engaging the youth, and we are. My program is a STEM plus arts based organization, and one of the things that I wanted to ensure that we had was an environmental focus, or eSTEM programs. One of the most successful ones that is heavily attended is our IMAP climate change program, and that is where I call it our data and tech driven advocacy. So we're teaching the kids how to use geospatial technology along with AI and data analytics, also teaching them research principles where they're researching climate change in their areas. So we've had simultaneously programs going in Dallas, Portland, Seattle, and Los Angeles, where we were working with Blue Origin. No, actually, it was SpaceX. I was teaching the youth during the course of the program how to read satellite data and to see the impacts of climate change in their particular cities. And that's an 8-week program. So these youth are first, we're teaching them about environmental injustice. So they know about the certain inequities in their communities, in those spaces, and environmental justice. Then they're looking at learning more, researching the actual issues, and then using their voice for community change. So for us, for me, it's a heart work because these kids are learning this, and that they're informing their families and their communities about what they've learned through their presentations. And so getting the elders involved with the legacy sharing, the storytelling, the history of environmental injustice, the history of brownfields. So sharing that knowledge, the storytelling with that next generation. So that's one of the programs that I'm very, very proud of.
Amazing.
Mm.
Indeed, indeed. Thank you for sharing that. Wow. Jennifer, did you want to talk a little bit about how the young people are engaged? Because I know you all do a lot of work with young people over in Southwest Baltimore.
100%. So I'm going to go back to my little share. So that same team that we were working with down with at the conference, looking at that park, they were like, "Oh my gosh, that was so amazing the way you got the kids involved at this conference." We work with a whole class every year at the local middle and high school in the neighborhood, and asked if NDC would partner with them on all the work that the kids were doing for the year following. And so we started coming to class a few days a week. They were working with a professor from Towson too, to do a lot of land history research in the neighborhood to understand the history of the different industrial uses in the community that over time developed into the conditions that everyone was experiencing in the present day. And through that land research, they realized that there were 2 empty lots right next to their school. And so we brainstormed with them what might be an interesting way to engage that land, that actual space. And we decided that they wanted to learn how they could actually, one lot was city owned, how they could adopt that lot. And then one lot was owned, but it seemed like an absentee owner and that was very overgrown. So the city-owned lot is the one we see everybody standing on, and then the overgrown lot was the other lot. So the kids worked together to get permission from the city to do a vacant lot project on the lot. And then they worked with a volunteer lawyer through the Community Law Center to start writing to the owner of this overgrown lot, first to get permission to just clear out all the weeds and invasive greens to be able to use it as like a forest patch. And then finally to buy that lot and to decide what to do with both lots next. And so we brought some volunteer design team and said, okay, if we're going to activate this lot as like a kid space for the next few years to just get to know the land closely and to have a place where the kids could hang out together after school. And the kids worked with the designers and came up with ideas for how to spend time there. And then over a couple weeks, we just cleared out all the weeds and everything all together. We rented tools. The kids learned how to use all the tools. And then we had a whole weekend of building together the designs they had come up with, and then finished it off with a party, all created and hosted by the kids. And so they really, I think, I saw them experience like, you walk past the vacant lots all the time in Baltimore City, that is all land that you're actually allowed to do something with if you activate yourself to do it. And all of the steps you could go through to take a random vacant lot into a space that you've completely built a playground on and hosted a big party. And then that even went further over time. The next step with the Neighborhood Design Center was then Dr. Melanie Thomas, who was kind of one of the leaders of United Workers, decided that maybe that land should be a place for a new healthy home. And first worked with NDC with a volunteer architect to start to think about how you could maximize residential space on the land in that block. And then eventually hiring that architect to come up with a whole design plan. And the youth engagement did not stop there. They worked with the architect and some professors from the Maryland Institute College of Art, and some other folks in the neighborhood started building a whole program at one of the local high schools, Mervo, to do a building technology partnership with the architect and builders. And the kids are out there all the time. They've test modeled all of these are completely net zero houses. They don't use zero energy, with all green building technology. And the kids and the designers like test modeled every element of this building before they built it for real to make sure it was going to meet all those net zero things, learn how to use all the tools. You can see a kid in the foreground there videoing the whole thing to create to-dos and TikToks and all about what they're working on. And so the kids have been integrated from day one all the way to the current day. It's pretty amazing.
Awesome. And I believe, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Jennifer, was your organization like launched or in support of Destiny Walford?
Exactly,
So
Destiny.
in 2000, I believe it was around 2006, she
Uh-huh.
was, no, 2016. She
Yeah,
was
2016.
16 years old,
Yeah.
and she played an instrumental role in stopping that trash burning power plant in South
Exactly, and
Baltimore.
was given a global award
Mhm,
for
mhm,
that
mhm.
incinerator battle. Yeah.
Absolutely. So when we talk about examples of young people, you know, throughout the history of this country, from environmental movement to civil rights movement, young people, particularly Black young people, have always had a space, right? What they brought and what they bring to the movement has always gone against the norm. And during the civil rights movement, when most folks, you know, wanted to go to nonviolent, you know, way, some of the younger people were like, no, Stokely Carmichael, no, we need to fight, you know, Black Panther, we need to fight, you know, guns, you know, and not to say one way is better than the other, but young people have always made their mark, right? And they're making their mark even in the EJ movement.
I think that they're not as far like trained as we are, so they just have more original and radical thoughts. Their minds haven't been like so formed by the dominant culture yet. They just they have better ideas. And they're not afraid to voice from their heart and their instinct as
And just some more examples of young people in Baltimore. There's a organization called Plantation Park Heights, Urban Farm. I'm putting that information in the chat box. And if you all can just share that with me, because I know what I'm putting in the chat box, everyone can't see. So if you can help me out again, just to make sure that everyone gets this information. And then here is the, and I remember meeting Farmer Chippy for the first time and saying, why do you call this a plantation? You know, I don't really like that word. And he said, you know what, I'm taking our words back. I'm taking our space back. I'm taking our words back. I'm training the young people, you know, so that they know. And it's amazing to see the work that they're doing with all young people, but specifically the young Black males that he has working with him. It truly is amazing to see the work that they're doing. And so,
space. So
yeah.
creative. The creativity of spaces like that. Anytime I'm feeling a little low, I go to one of the urban farms in the city that's and it just like the creativity and the growing things, it just always perks me back up.
Yeah. Brianna, you were about to say something.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I have a friend who is a professor at a university in Chicago, and she like really makes it her business to like place students, particularly well, all students, but particularly like Black and brown students into like nonprofit organizations across the city in Chicagoland. And so I found that mentoring Gen Z is so important because
Yeah.
there's a generational gap. I'm a millennial, and
Mhm.
there's a generational gap. And coming to work, I mean, even if people that look like you, it's just different. And so just being a space and like going to lunch, having conversations, I felt like I didn't have that. And my
Yeah.
friend said, be that. So I try to be that.
I love it.
That's one of the ways. And then I'm working on a course. I work at Wayne State, and I'm working on a course that helps students in the social work department tell their stories around environmental justice. Because, like I said, I learned very late. I think people should learn it earlier. They should learn what their story is, and so they. I don't even think people understand that this is a industry. It's a field. It's somewhere you can work. You can like help. Like this could be just your job, and I think that that's important. That's
Indeed, indeed. And what we're losing one of our panelists, but before you go, I want to give you an opportunity to just, you know, give some closing thoughts since you have to leave us early. We really appreciated hearing your voice and you sharing, and want to give you an opportunity to close out since You have to leave us early.
Thank you. I booked another meeting with my board right after this, so I'm sorry about that. But I just want to say that this work, we have to think about the future. We have to think about not only our communities, but communities for all. Something that I just wanted, because I do like data, just wanted to share really quickly some numbers that I pulled up. Says approximately 13.4% of Black American children have asthma, compared to only 7.3% of white children, a disparity heavily linked to air quality. An EPA reported in 2021 that Black people are 40% more likely than all other groups to live in areas with the highest projected increases in temperature-related events impacting health. So again, this is something that we all have to look at and do. And I feel that with all of you, I know I'm going to fight this fight all the way to the grave.
Indeed.
So yeah, so let's just keep it up. And it's so important to have these type of conversations, these kind of summits. I will definitely try to be there in Atlanta in June if I can. And thank you for sharing what's happening here with the Bullard Center
Yeah.
at Texas Southern University.
Yes.
Thank you all. This was wonderful. I got to jump. Bye-bye.
Great to have you. Thank you so much. And Brianna, what you said was so important about what our young people need. And, I'm thinking from my generation, and I'm in Generation X, and the generation above me, I believe they're the boomers, right? And I think sometimes we just need to step aside, right? I think sometimes, we are so engrossed, and we should be, this has been our life's work, but we have to do a better job of grooming that next level leadership, right? And then when we groom them, we have to be okay with stepping aside, and I think that's something that's been very difficult for Black leadership just across the board. And I think what we have to do is do a better job of linking, like you said, that mentoring, that connection, so that we have legacy leadership, legacy, generational, intergenerational legacy leadership across the board. Yeah, yeah, yeah. All right, these conversations, oh my goodness. This has been amazing. So listen, I want to, before I kind of jump into the last question, I want to just check in with the audience. I don't think I can see their questions, but I want to kind of give the audience an opportunity to kind of chime in. And if they have a question, if they're a little shy, if they want to put it in the chat. If not, I will go ahead to the last question, but I just wonder if they had any feedback on what our young people need. What do we need to do to help our young people in this fight for environmental justice? How can we better equip our young people?
Yeah, if there's any questions, you can add them to the chat or raise your hand, and we'll take them. Yeah, I don't think I see any questions right now, but
Okay. Let's see. I know I was just giving them a few minutes because if they're like me, it takes me a minute to type.
no, definitely.
So, before I moved on, I just wanted to give them a couple minutes just in case.
Yeah.
So okay, so let's look at this last question. We started off framing the question around the definition of environmental racism and how it looked historically and what it looks like today. We then kind of moved into our lived experience and the community impact of our work, right? And then our work leads us to the organizing and the policy and the advocacy. And then you can't do this without, making sure that we're doing next level and next generation and building our young people and making sure that we are keeping our efforts on an intergenerational pathway. And so that brings us to what we're hoping the impact of our work will result in, and those are solutions and sustainable community building. So I'm wondering what each of you feel, what does a truly sustainable Black community look like, and how do we get there? Go ahead, Brianna, you got to unmute yourself.
Okay. So I say it starts with like allowing diversity in. Because as Black people, we're not monolithic. It's very diverse. It's some conversations that just need to happen, like as far as like that diaspora is concerned. That community building is like always, it's like an ebb and flow. It's like an ongoing process. And so I just want to say, like, it starts there, it continues there, sharing, reimagining too, because I don't think like what we have right now, like to get, I've always thought like people have, you know, painted a picture of like a house is money. That's how you build wealth. And Black people have not been able to attain a house, right? But what if we redefine what it means to like live? Like, what if we redefine everything that we think we know?
Mm, I like that. What if we redefine everything that we think that we know? Ah! Yes. Go ahead, Jennifer. You were about to say something?
No, I'm very inspired by what Brianna's saying. You know, I think that right now, you know, like I obviously can't answer that question. That's for my people to answer. You know, NDC is really here to help accomplish other people's hopes and dreams. But it does feel, you know, like I'm experiencing right now with the current administration that you can get caught up in fighting oppression so hard that you lose track of your North Star, right? Like there just hasn't been enough space for like truly creative imagination of an unbound community on both sides, right? Like I'm trapped up in it too, that, you know, if we have to spend all of our time fighting wrong, we don't get enough time to just do right. And I'm excited about a future where we can have some pretty unbound imagination.
Mm. And I thank you. I really do, Jennifer. Thank you for sharing that from your perspective. I really do appreciate, you know, your work, and I appreciate, you know, the passion and commitment you have for the communities that you're working with in South Baltimore. You know, for me, you know, I have to think back on, my ancestors, right? Being forced to come here in the way that they came here. Oppression has always been a part of our experience in what we call America, you know? And so we had no other opportunity but to survive and thrive, and we had to create creativity in spite of oppression, right? And from that, you know, we built, the nation. We built the United States, we built the Americas, and so I think it's a reminder that although we've come so far as a people, right, we still have so far to go, really. And I think, this moment that we're in right now in the United States, in the political climate that we're in, it's a reminder that we've come a long way, but we have a long way to go.
Real long way.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And then I think there's someone raised their hand. Robin, if you go ahead and unmute yourself.
Hi, Robin. Introduce yourself and come on and get into this dialogue with us.
Hi. Thank you guys for all your sharing all your perspectives. Truly appreciate it. I'm from New Jersey, and I think the question was building leaders, future leaders, correct? In terms
Yeah,
of
yeah.
youth for today, and it starts with grooming.
Mm-hmm.
I think it can even start in and when they're the appropriate age to even run for local offices, because in your local municipalities is where it's most important, and starting and leading even within school, you know what I mean,
Yeah.
in K through 12. It starts there, and if you provide the tools and the skill sets that are needed um, to move forward and advance in the leadership roles, in terms of whether it's politics or even doing grassroots efforts, whatever it looks like. But I believe you start growing them at an early age. Okay. And a lot of you look at, I think of Tupac Shakur,
Mm-hmm.
and who activism, leadership was in his DNA, just
Mm-hmm.
based on who his parents were
Yeah.
and environment. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that's that's my lens.
Thank you for sharing that.
Mhm.
Thank you. Thank you. Indeed, indeed.
And if there's any other questions as well, you can add them to the chat or raise your hand. Or even comments as well if you want to add to the conversation and interact.
I thank you guys all for the work that you're doing. It's very, very much interesting. Especially what's going on in Baltimore and in Texas.
Yeah.
Uh, and someone's important. No, she one that was in Portland and then also in Texas. And Jennifer, you're in Baltimore as well. So it's a lot that's going on that you guys are really doing in terms of the environmental injustices. And I like the fact that the last panelist spoke about the physical effects of an environmental injustice in terms of asthma and things like that. You see with this political realm, where we're at right now, and with the potential cuts to Medicaid and et cetera. I don't know if you guys know this, if you have any family members that suffer from seasonal allergies or either asthma, but a lot of those medications are no longer paid for by insurance. It's over the counter,
Yeah.
including something as basic as a rescue inhaler, which would be albuterol, is the generic
Mhm.
name, and Proventil may be one of the trade names. Again,
Mhm.
it's it has to be paid for out of pocket. And if you think of how everything is built based on the dialogue that you guys shared today, uh, and the environments that folks are living in, and an increase of folks being unhoused based again on the high cost of everything, housing, all it just all matters. And coming together in a platform such as this is so important.
Indeed, indeed. Thank you so much for that insight. I really appreciate that. I do see Carlos. Thank you, Carlos. Carlos said, thank you for this conversation. We need more of these. We also need to recognize that our roots stretch back far beyond just the US. Indeed, that will enable us to diversify our critical thinking to produce varied solutions. Thanks again. Indeed, indeed, indeed. And I think, a lot of organizations, including my own, are very intentional about building bridges with our brothers and sisters on the continent. My organization, we have a particular project called Building Bridges, and we're working with residents in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania. And shameful plug, we have an event coming up on Thursday where we're having a conversation with residents from Dar es Salaam, along with residents from Baltimore, and they're talking about how the adverse effects of climate change, how it's impacting their neighborhoods and what solutions and what actions they're taking. And so you all are welcome to join that conversation Thursday, the 22nd at 11 a.m. Feel free to visit our website, greenjusticeworkers.org, for more information. But absolutely, everything that we've shared here today hits so deeply, right? And it's so relevant to our history, our present, and our future. And so I want to go ahead and close us out with this last question. I know I said the last one was the last one, but this is going to be our closing reflection. And I think this is so important. And I'm very interested to hearing your comments. How can allies, funders, and institutions support this work without co-opting or sidelining the Black community and their voice or voices? Go ahead, Brianna, unmute yourself.
Okay. Because that's a very interesting question, just because it's like where we've come from, right? Like we've coming out of this era, civil rights are like under attack, lots of attacks on everything that we know. DEI, it's like you can't use certain language. I think we need to creating a circle, creating a circle of like support and allies and people that create something together. Unfortunately, I think that ego is like a part of also like the ego death of this work, because it's like an ego death to do this work. And so I think having more conversations and creating circles of community care is important, and that's how we can all work together to really see change.
Oh, I love that. I love that. I love that. Yes. And I think that's so important. I think it's important that we work together. I think it's important that spaces are allowed for community to come up with their own solutions, as opposed to being told you got to follow this solution. And I think oftentimes, and don't get me wrong, I love funders, I love foundations that want to give to our work, but oftentimes it's
Too much.
sometimes it's a little nerve-wracking, because sometimes they want to dictate how they want to see progress. And we have to, assert ourselves and say, that might have worked in that community, but we need to figure out what works in our community, and so I think it's very important that communities are able to be indigenous in terms of who they are, and recognize that maybe it's not always a cookie cutter solution. Sometimes, modeling and scaling, sometimes that works, but that may not work in every situation, and to be flexible and open to that. And I think that's so important. I think education and awareness is important. I think it's important, as you said, Brianna, to build allies. I think it's important to work with all people of all races, of all colors. I also think it's important that, because of the issues that we faced as a Black community, that we have the opportunity as a Black community to come together, to learn, to grow, to heal. A lot of the work that we deal with, and we haven't even touched on this, the experiences, it's traumatic, it's trauma, and the lived trauma of dealing with many of the issues that we talked about is a whole nother conversation, and how that lived trauma impacts us socially, economically, spiritually, physically. It runs the gambit. Yeah.
In watching philanthropy dribble out the resources with so much control, not at a scale that actually allows for all of that healing. It just, it makes me very upset a lot of the time, interacting. And I feel like they didn't get their money usually in a good way. They should just give it all away as fast as possible to the communities that they impacted. Period.
Yeah,
Just hand it all over. Quit managing it. Quit managing it. Hand it over.
I see a hand from Robin.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
I'm sorry, I apologize for that. That is such an important question in terms of when you're dealing with receiving funding. And I think the main thing you would think that with philanthropy, it would come with agency and not all of the other price tags that's and that's attached to it. You know what I mean? When you receive that funding, because a lot of times when you receive funding, you know, like she said, they want you to do this, they want you to do that. It has to be attached with this. It has to be spent this way. Whatever. It's so much on it. But I think when you come to the table, and if you could get to the table and come to an agreement whereby the agency that's receiving the funding is able to maintain and sustain agency.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I think of like social entrepreneurship models where it's always about replication. You know what I mean? We don't care about that, but then, you know, and I think of recently, Bill Gates is, I guess, having some remorse because he's always said he was going to give away his money, but because of what happened with the USAID funding, he's more being more vigilant about just giving his money away at a rapid rate. I don't know if you guys have seen that in the news because of what's going on in the motherland right now and others, because of all the folks are being affected by the loss of that funding.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up, Robin. I think that's a great point. And I think it also begs the question as to why it's so important for organizations to be self-sustaining as well, that we have co-op models, we have nonprofit business ventures that will allow us to be able to sustain ourselves and not be 100% dependent on foundations. And I think that's truly the model that we have to go, or else we find ourselves in a situation where we're constantly with our hand out and we're in a situation where we're just like, you know, in need all the time. And I think we have to, as we're doing this work, we have to, and I love, you know, the word you said, social entrepreneurship. We have to be thinking outside of the box. We have to be thinking of how we can sustain ourselves in a way that would allow us to be self-sustaining. I see, Ron, you came on. You you came on right at the moment, so you must have something good you want to say. You're muted.
Thank you, Lynn. Thank you, and thank you all of you for sharing in this discussion, because it's a very critical and pivotal discussion that we need to have, and it's an ongoing discussion, particularly around how we generate funds and revenue to do the work that we need to do. I'm so in the space of social entrepreneurship. You know, like in the church, we got to pass the basket. And so we got work to do. And these times are really calling us to really re-examine ourselves and re-examine the systems that we have supported. So I like to thank all of you for sharing this evening in our last webinar series of the spring. Thank you, Amal, for the work you've done. You've done a really fantastic job in leading all these webinar series. Yeah, that's all I have to say. I'm holding all my talk for Atlanta.
Thanks, Ron. Robin, did you want to say something else?
Yes.
Come on.
Yes, I do. Oh my gosh, I was listening to him thinking about what he was going to say, and Atlanta, and I literally just lost my train of thought. Oh wow, what was I going to say? In terms of this is an opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, it's an opportunity. All right, to make a new taste of lemonade, a new flavor of lemonade.
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
That's the way and we've been here before. Okay,
Yeah.
and so and sometimes you get complacent. Okay, that's fine. You know, we learn from our past to inform the current and and definitely take us further for the future.
Indeed, indeed. And even in that, even in spite of where we are right now, I think it's important for us to remember that Sankofa, to look back, that we stand on the shoulders of greatness. Our ancestors have come and have overcome so much. They have had victory after victory. You look at, these court cases that are being overturned, but you look at them at the time, Brown versus Board of Education, they came against the impossible to create these changes in this country. And if they could do it, if they did it, I think it's a church song by Ty Trippett. He said, if they did it before, you can do it again. And so if they did it before, we can do it again. And so we stand on, they have already set the parameters for us high. They have already shown us that it can be done. And I think we need to, draw from their strength. We need to go back and reread their stories. Even if you look at, the work of, some of the people I talked about, Hazel Johnson out of the Projects of Chicago, and reread the stories of people who have fought this fight of environmental justice. We have a lot to stand on. We have a lot. And so we have to take courage, right? And I know we're in a time right now, and we're dealing with some folks where it can kind of make us feel like, is it even worth it? And we got to remind ourselves that it is worth it. It is worth it. Right?
Yes.
It is worth it.
Yes. Guys represent everything being here, everybody, every thought that we share is relevant, and
Yes.
it's just a wonderful thing. Mr. Hans has been doing this for since, I don't know, I've been following since 2020, so, and I'm just watching the growth. It's amazing. So
Indeed, indeed,
so
indeed.
much. Thank you so much for all the work everyone's doing.
Yes, and I want to thank each and every one of you. Want to thank you, Jennifer, for the work that you're doing down in Southwest Baltimore with Dr. Thomas and others. And Brianna, want to thank you with the work you're doing with ACOSA and Sparkle, with all of us in the EJ40 initiative, and, Amol and Ron. I want to thank, you for creating this space for us, because, these spaces are important. It's important to be able to have a space where you can reflect and you can talk and you can share, you can learn and you can grow. This is therapeutic, but it's also educational, and it's what we call iron sharpens iron, Yeah, and then Robin, and who's left? Greer and Scott, and we had quite a few other folks earlier. Just want to thank everybody that has tuned in, and just thank you for being part of the conversation.
Absolutely. Like, I want to echo your words as well, Lynn. Thank you so much for everyone for joining tonight's conversation. Lynn, you led a wonderful conversation. Always listening to you is always wonderful. And then I want to thank our panelists, Jennifer, Brianna. I know Dina left a little bit early, but thank you so much for taking the time out being a part of this conversation. And as we conclude this series, I want to thank each and every one of our speakers, Ron, who was a part of this entire planning process, because this is the last webinar that we're doing for our spring 2025 series. So we're taking a bit of a short break in the summer, and we're planning our fall series, which we're right now in the process of planning. But I want to thank everyone who joined. This wouldn't be possible. We have these conversations for people to echo our words. And I just want to thank, like I said before. So with that, if anyone has any other closing remarks.
Have a beautiful night.
Have a beautiful night.
Peace and blessings, everybody.
Take care, stay safe, be blessed.
Thank you.